Thank you all for being here with me. It is wonderful to talk about soil. In all my studies and work, soil has been something that I've always returned to. And at first, it was intimidating. At first, it felt like science, and then it became life. And it became how life works. And then it became the linchpin for the health of life and the interconnection between all life. And also the stage at which, you can really study and understand how all life works, because that's really the birthplace and the return for all life. So thank you for joining me in this series of webinars and discussions and Q&As on soil. Today is Build Soil from Scratch Anywhere, and this is part 2 of Soil Solutions. So let me actually go like this. There we go. So first of all, we want to build our soil. And so when I say build soil anywhere, I know everyone wants to build soil. So that's like a catch-all. We all want to make our soil better. We all want to have improved soil. But first, I think what we need to do is define some things, because exactly what we're talking about, we got to get on the same page, because what is soil is such a big question. As I said, it's where things come from, where things go to. And there are some people that just say, it's the clay, the sand, the silt. And you can prove to yourself what your soil is actually made of. You can do this simple jar soil test. And if it's 10 centimeters, that actually makes it really easy to do the percentage calculations. But you could do 20, it's all up to you. But the idea here is you shake the soil out with equal parts soil and water and let it settle. And mind you, it might take your soil some time to settle, depending on your soil composition. You might have to add like a surfactant or something like that, like soap, to make it settle out easier and quicker. But the point is you get to see the layers very clearly, the different types of minerals. I say different types, knowing that there's more to come on this. And then you can calculate and map them. And then this chart is like what we used to use in soil science. And we would be like, well, you've got sandy loam, or you've got, clay, and, all these names and everything. And organic matter didn't make it onto the chart. You got to request organic matter to be additional to your normal routine tests on soil tests even today. And from like good universities like Texas A&M, you have to request that. That's not considered standard. And after today, you're going to be like, man, that really should be standard. So we're really talking about clay, sand, silt, organic matter, and soil life, right? Just as so many soil mentors today say, you got to have that life in there. And it is true, but there's more to it. So let's get into that for a second, because there's an implication here. Because for those things to persist and to exist, there had to be something that happened before. And without that thing that happened before, for it to be, those things wouldn't exist. So the organic matter and the life got there and only stay there because of photosynthesis and plant roots. Without those two things, they're not going to get what they need to persist. And we're going to get into that here in specific, because it's what facilitates photosynthesis that in very particular drives this whole system. And whoops. This is the webinar. I used this slide to make that ad. But but it's the sun. It's the sunlight, and it's the ultimate source of energy and power for photosynthesis in almost all foods. So because it's that simple, it follows that if we follow the actual processes for nature, we'll understand the way that these things were originally formed and reinforced and maintained. And that's what we're going to do today. So what I teach is this very simplified, and this is the beginning end of what I teach essentially. And it's these 5, and obviously there's plant roots and photosynthesis, right, on one leaf, but it's these 5 aspects that are going to actually guide us in understanding these. And so they're very simple on one hand, they're very generalized on one hand, but it's really critical to, I think, bring it down to this level of simplicity so that we can organize our thinking around this, because it dictates our actions quite beautifully when we do, and it makes it so we don't miss anything. All right. So do you remember from last week what soil organic matter is made from? Like, how is it created? It's the plant roots releasing those exudates. It's the fungi breaking down woody biomass. It's the decomposition of organic matter, and it's all facilitated by the biology, the saprophytes, mycorrhizal fungi, and it's that carbonaceous sugar that's initially created through photosynthesis and structure through the growth of that plant that actually fulfills all of these, right? The plant roots while it's alive. Then when it's dead, that's the woody biomass and the decomposed organic matter. And the animals that are dead too, they were eating and subsisting off of the plants, which is the sunlight. So it all goes right back to the sunlight. Okay. And we know that, it's carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen from last week, right? That's what our organic molecules, organic matter is all made of. So yeah, we remember that. But what are the clay, sand, and silt made of? Because you mentioned that before, right? Earlier in the talk. And the thing is, they're mostly made of silicon and oxygen. And so they're all silicates of differing fraction sizes. So sand is the biggest. We can see a particle of sand. In terms of size, it's like a basketball in relation to a golf ball, which is the size of silt, to a dot that you would make with chalk on a chalkboard, and that's clay. Let's go basketball, golf ball, and a dot for clay. So understanding it from that perspective, you probably could imagine a couple different things. This is why when you've got sandy soil, smaller particle things that have no structure leach right out. It's basketballs. I mean, you think about pouring the golf balls into the cage with all the basketballs in it, all the balls at the store, at the kids store, the toy store, or the sports store, even like a Target, have bouncy balls, all those spaces in between that, there's tons of space. Imagine pouring golf balls. It would just go right through it and be washed out. So, and then you imagine like the clay specks, right? You throw the clay in there and it'll just wash right out and get leached out. It's a really interesting thing. And that means that like you got to tie these different fraction sizes together. And obviously there are ranges of sizes. You don't have all sand be that exact basketball size magically. That's the average size, right? And so it all ranges and it's all, you know what I mean, kind of abuts against each other in reality. But it does demonstrate that when you have like river sand or large fraction sands, that, things leach. And that's pretty understandable. But now think about silicates with me for a moment. Silicon Valley. if Silicon Valley is running on the ability for microchips to hold information, transmit information, and transmit energy, then maybe we need to rethink how we think about soil. And this metaphor is something I came up with very early on in writing Regenerative Soil. And I realized that the silicates are acting like the chipboards. They are the actual hardware. The minerals are the hardware, which makes sense. But they literally are. They're silicates. They can transmit and they can hold information. And then the software is the organic matter. And the organic matter is also the battery, like we talked about last week, right? But it's also the software, because let's say you're running Windows and that's annuals. Well, that's your organic matter that's more balanced pH and a little bit more alkaline in some cases, right? And then you're like, oh no, I'm running a Mac, right? A perennial system, perhaps. Notice I did doors and pair. But that perennial system is going to be more acidic and more fungal, more reduced, meaning more energy, more organic matter. And so we suddenly recognize that the type of organic matter and often the amount of organic matter readily determines where you are. If you've got a lot of organic matter, you're going to be hugging towards pH 7. And so they're determining the nature of what can exist there. That's why when you have that hot compost and you had a ton of manure in it, it was super hot, and then it just turns, it's beautiful looking, and then you put it on and you get nothing but green growth, and you're like, wow, I got nothing, no fruit this year, but the plants got giant. What happened, you know? And it's because the program was and you got tons of weeds, and it's because the program was oxidized and alkaline. It's fresh hot compost. That's what it is, high in nitrates. And so that doesn't bode well for making fruit and maturing your plants. So it really, the organic matter really sets the tone. It's the program, the operating system, the OS. And what I realized, and I knew from years of doing this work, but I realized in this metaphor that the soil food web members were the actual users and operators of the system. And what we did in degenerative agriculture is we removed the microbes by using fungicides, by using pesticides, synthetic. The reality is anything purified chemical wise wants to return to the state of organic matter, which means it is like a drowning person that you're trying to rescue, and they're going to like cling to you, you know, and drown you potentially. And so you add the nitrogen, the synthetic purified nitrogen, and it's going to bond to everything, and it's going to eat up and solubilize the organic matter and all the humates, because it's like, hey, will you be my friend? And remember, nitrogen is the key component in making our composts work and gas off CO2. So in the soil, adding too much nitrogen gases off your carbon, gases off your organic matter. So we basically like remove the actual operators and then try to do it ourselves. And it's like the boss who doesn't know anything about computers coming in and telling the engineers what to do and then kicking them out of the way. Get out of the way, boys. I'll show you how it's done. And then like like there's steam coming out of the engine and like, you know what I mean? And things are exploding and it's like, they have no idea what they're doing in regards to what the microbes can do. I'm not saying that, you know, all the traditional farmers don't know what they're doing in general. There's a lot of knowledge in that space, and a lot of grit and hard work. So I don't want to diminish anyone. Don't want to ever do that. That's my family too. But we removed and we were sold this, you know, and it looked good. We saw the growth, you know what I mean? But in that process, we were going for short-term gains and long-term losses by removing the soil food web members, the microbes inside the plants, inside the roots, in the rhizosphere, around the roots, and in general on the farm. Because in the ocean of plants, they've got no decomposition in Iowa and Nebraska and such. And now we're bringing windrows of compost to provide CO2 in situ because they need it. Otherwise, they're going to like start like pumping in like CO2 and stuff and like, don't do that, please. You know what I mean? Like we got enough. We have natural sources that we can utilize. So, but this is literally what's happening. And so we need to be able to reach these farmers and help them understand the actual systems of nature, and utilize the beautiful simplistic patterns that exist. So I figured that this metaphor is much more appropriate on multiple levels: the hardware, the software, and the operators. And there's a new layer to this that I will reveal today that hasn't been, you know, revealed. And it's critically important. And the thing is, I think that for our generation, it makes a lot of sense. Your computer, you know, it doesn't work without an operating system. Windows or Mac or Linux, it doesn't work. When I was growing up, this is going to date me. When I was growing up, I had an Apple IIe, and the thing wouldn't work unless the floppy disk was in there. You got to put that thing in there, and then we play the Snoopy's like anyway. Those games were crazy. So this feels very genuine to me, for like how it actually works too, which is so wild, because the more you start studying this, the soil, you begin to recognize how we are imperfectly imitating the soil with our economies, with computers, with the way we interconnect in the internet. I mean, you've heard that cute, you know, World Wide Web thing, you know, like with like the Wood Wide Web thing, you know, that's cute. But realistically, though, we are imitating nature. We're doing biomimicry without understanding that we're doing biomimicry. Even combustion, externalized digestion for energy, turning things into CO2 is what fungi do. And fungi within us, right? And so we're really doing biomimicry, and it's about connecting to the way that nature is doing these things so efficiently and well, that will allow us to allow ourselves to be human, to do the things that are very human, running around the bonfire, you know what I mean, when it's seasonal and safe and everything, and celebrating with our friends, you know, all these kinds of things that are deep, you know, camping and being around a fire, you know, and telling stories. There's so many things that are very deep into to who we are as humans, that have totally appropriate and powerful seedings for, and understanding how they connect is I think the next stage. And I really believe that using the permaculture lens, and using it as a lens, not as a dogma, being very open with interpretation with other people and discussion, and just trying to live regeneratively, you know, making the world and nature a better place as we make it as we do, you know, good for ourselves too. It's that beautiful thing, you know, that beautiful overlap. So this metaphor was actually what started the book. I had written like 10 pages of an intro, and it was really about what I thought the book was going to be. And then I kept studying and reading and studying and reading, and let that sit. And then this metaphor came out of months of deep study and learning. And then I went back and rewrote the entire intro to lead up to this, because this is the way it actually works. We are in a world that relies upon the things are bioelectric. I mean, one of my favorite albums when I was young was Weather Report, I Sing the Body Electric. And this, it seems so out there and everything. And now to have it like be like, oh no, there's wavelengths, there's frequencies, everything, has a frequency for health, everything has a frequency for unhealth. You know what I mean? Energy, all these things are real. The fungi create glowing crystals in the soil that shows evidence of their work, leaving a trail behind them of glowing, beautiful crystals. It sounds almost impossible, but it's true. It's so beautiful and interesting. So this is why I think that all this stuff leads back to simplicity, because we cannot get away from who we are and what we are. We're humans, which means that we are of the soil, dust to dust, all that. And we're also stewards. And that, and I believe from everything I've studied, everything that I've learned, that our function is much like fungi, where we're successional stewards. Try saying that 10 times fast. Successional stewards of the environment around us. And that role, when we're facilitating ourselves and others to do that, is ultimately where we find our integrity and empowerment, making the world a better place. All right, let's keep going. And so photosynthesis, again, we looked at this picture last time. That's where all that energy from photosynthesis is being stored. So it's the battery, it's also, it flexes. So you can continuously have more organic matter, and it buffers itself towards pH 6.5 to 7. And as you have more organic matter, you actually can have more nutrients without them being toxic. So some people get soil reports and they've got toxic levels, except they've got high organic matter. And so it buffers it out. But it also can hold more energy. And we're going to get into that right now. But this also means that minerals are different functionally from compost. Because if the compost and the organic matter is more like the program and the minerals are more like the hardware, so that must mean there's something more to this, right? And this is what I've realized recently, that they work together very particularly. Soil organic matter is the battery, minerals are the hardware, but water is the wiring. We need water for photosynthesis, so that's fuel for that process. But everything else must happen in water and use water to continue their processes and to travel and send and dissolve and solubilize and all these different things. So water is the wiring. Have you guys seen this stuff? Fourth phase water. Has that everyone seen this? When you do high voltage, water creates a bridge. Okay. And paramagnetism in the soil is directly related to this whole like bringing energy down into the soil. It's also surface area. The surface area creates a field. The smaller the particle, the greater the field. This is why clay can hold more things than sand. But it's also that energy that's being drawn down. So it's also the particle size and the energy. So we've got organic matter where it can be stored. We've got particle size that are creating these fields. And then we have water that links them all together. And when that charge is moving through it and being held in the soil, you get cohesion. And that cohesion doesn't look exactly like this, because this is macro. This is, you can see with your own eyes, just between two cups like this. It's micro. So this micro cohesion looks like this. It polarizes the water into a gel state on surfaces. And that gel state creates the ability for biofilms to actually create interrelational layers and different species and successional layers. I've been studying biofilms this week in Compost, down to the individual. And the thing is, this creates structure, this gel polarity that gets formed when this is in. It's magnified in light. This happens with any form of light. Could be like UV heat light, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to just be, and that's why I can form, you know, in a warm compost in the shade, regardless of whether it's directly in light. But the idea is that with this whole system, when we're adding energy into it, we are sending water into a more structured gel-like phase. It's sticking to the particles even more and interconnecting things, allowing the microbes to use those charges like maglev trains. And so this is why they're like, it is incredible. They're sending, you know, nitrogen 6 kilometers, or like they're sending, you know, minerals kilometers away from plants. And they've been able to track this by doing like isotopes, radioactive isotopes, and sending them through. And so we've been able to prove that this is happening. And it really revolves around water having these crazy new states. Fourth phase water is one of the ways to describe it. There's, because every institution wants to publish on a topic, they have to slightly disagree and then give it their own name. And so there's like, I think 3 going names for the new effects that they've discovered. Well, that Dr. Gerald Pollack, that Jerry, and I was able to interview him. He's an awesome guy. He's a good friend now. Jerry discovered, and now all these people, well, backtrack. Jerry discovered this guy who was all about this, and then this woman who was carrying on this guy's work about the fourth phase water. And then he published about it and brought it out more into the open and made himself vulnerable. So he didn't discover it. I misspoke then. But he published on it, much like James White published on rhizophagy, though someone in Australia a couple years before may be the discoverer, but they may have been found someone else who had done it, and they were more obscure. Maybe this is what happens. You've got like the fringe people who are like doing the cutting edge, and everyone who's more commercial watching over their shoulder, going, taking notes, and then going to their audience and doing it. So that's what universities do. That's what, you know, everyone's doing on YouTube. That's why I'm always increasingly like, you follow me? What? And I'm like, oh, I see why you follow me. Which minerals? So the thing is, we need all these minerals. These minerals all are vital for plant functions within the plant. And some of these you might be like, nickel, Matt, that's poisonous. Boron, I have a problem with too much boron. You know what I mean? Chlorine, how is that? You know what I mean? All these things, but actually, in my book and in my courses, I go through each one of these, and we talk about how they are micronutrients, and also macronutrients. You might be like, hydrogen, Matt, what are you talking about? but photosynthesis, right? So we have to remember that, like, each of these, and oxygen as well, respiration. So we have to remember that all of these things are critical, cyclical, and in the holistic picture about how things interact and behave. And that's really kind of the space that I moved into. So it was like Elaine Ingham was like biology only. And then people were like minerals only. And John Kemp seemed like he's minerals only to a lot of people, and he's not. Top two tiers of his pyramid, remember? Robust biology. He doesn't get into exactly who, but robust is what he says, and he's got his own microbial blend. So but the thing is that you have all these people who are like, it's this or it's that, or it's mostly this, but the reality is it's all these things together in a completely beautiful, holistic, cyclical system. That's the way nature does it, not me. I mean, I'm biomimicry with the things I do. I'm trying to learn as much as I can from nature and adapt all the techniques that I've learned from all these incredible people. But um but it's this holistic approach that actually has been able, for me, seeing it from the cyclical, try to say that, cyclical holistic perspective, that's actually been able to put these things in their place. So it's like, yeah, we need biology, we need minerals, and this is how we need them. It's not just isolation. It's not just it's it's not magic. And so that's really what I've learned. And I've shown a couple of these videos on my YouTube. I showed part of chlorine. I showed molybdenum in its entirety. I showed part of calcium to give folks an idea of how we go through each of these. Because unless you understand these things from like a systemic perspective, you really don't know the plant. You really don't know the soil or what nature's really trying to teach us. And so that's what I did. I went down to the bottom layer. I went to how are plants actually, how do we get the soil? How do plants like do their thing? How are plants healthiest in nature? Because I know they like to say that like all plants in nature, they don't need fertilizer and everything's perfect, does the forest need fertilizer? You know what I mean? That whole thing. The reality is it's like there are places in the forest that are healthier than others and more fertile than others. And observing those places and understanding why they're better gives us so much more insight than just saying like blanket generalizations. So I had to go down to the specifics for all of this. Basically, what happened was I kept getting fed books that challenged things like head on. Like 80% of exudation has zero effect. Most of exudation gets reabsorbed. Like fundamental things, you're like, wait, what? And they're reabsorbing with all the microbes that they're growing on it so they can consume them. Different. And then the thing with all these minerals that we're talking about is there's all this antagonism. They're all fighting each other. And there are some that facilitate. See that green one, but pretty rare. So it's this relationship between these minerals that we're actually trying to buffer against with organic matter. And so it buffers the pH, like we already talked about. It keeps you hovering in that 6.57 range when you get your organic matter high enough. But it also and then depending on how waterlogged you are, the acidity affects it too, but that's a separate topic. But the soil organic matter buffers the pH and the mineral antagonism, and so it makes it so that you can have really high levels of some things. You can have an imbalance, and the soil does not notice it because your organic matter levels are high enough. So this means you need a minimum soil organic matter to grow anything effectively, though. Because if there's no place to put the energy, you know what I mean, the energy is lost. If there's no place for the buffering to happen, then the antagonism is what you get. If it's just minerals, the minerals aren't going to play nice. They're going to fight. So you need soil organic matter to buffer your mineral palette just as a starting point. And if you're doing this by volume, like people often ask me, like, what do I do for my potted plants? Like literally you could be doing, your compost by volume, and that determines your organic matter if you're mixing with regular soil. So for container gardens, I would go up to anywhere 50-50. And the reason I say not pure compost any longer, because, when I was younger, I would say do pure compost a la Elaine Ingham style, right? Um, I mean, Catalyst Bioamendment doesn't recommend that. Doesn't recommend that either now. It's because soil itself, the silicate nature of the soil is different from the organic matter molecules, the C, the O, the H, the N, in different configurations in the compost. And I'd also say that the compost is a lot more than anyone has communicated online. There's a completely new paradigm for compost and for the way decomposition works and the way that bacteria and fungi work that I discovered when I started DNA sequencing myself. Everyone sends things out to be sequenced by other people, and they give them back the genre and families and taxa and stuff, and they don't tell them the actual members who are there, actual individuals, because it opens up a can of worms. And I've been thinking about it for over a month now, and now I'm discussing it with other experts behind the scenes, and there's a lot more to this. But it's completely different than soil, the minerals. Yeah, compost is broken down plant material. So it has all those, if it's healthy, has all those things that we just talked about on those charts, those micro and macro. But the preponderance, or the overwhelming dominance of soils having silicates, like most soils are primarily silicates, even with high organic matter levels, like 20% high, 40%. It's like, and the rest is silicates. There's a reason. Nature uses everything. It's like, it's not like nature doesn't make mistakes or something like that. It's like nature's using everything to its advantage. So there's a reason why silicates are meant to be there. There's a reason why silicates are there. Wow. I'm gonna remove that annotation thing with this eraser. Ah, there, all gone. I don't know how that happened. Sorry, everyone. And it must be finished compost, because it was, we talked about last year with what destroyed the biodome. They used unfinished compost, and so it continued to gas off CO2 as it broke down more, which means it was eating up their oxygen. Right. So we have to be very careful with our container gardens. We got to make sure these things are finished, and be careful with finding the bad soil. You might find this soil that like use your hands. Touch your compost before you go shopping, if this is how you got to do it, and feel the soil. If the soil feels like there's lead mixed into it, you're like, this soil feels really heavy. Don't use it. Don't use it. That's fill soil. That's like that's gonna concrete and do weird things. Don't do it. Make sure you get garden soil or native soil ideally, and amend that. And for outdoor gardens, don't just do raised beds. If you have to, you feel like you have to do raised beds, you can do that. I'm not like anti-raised beds, but add soil organic matter, work it into the top layer, and add cover crops to your native soils and transform them into rich soils all around there. Unless there's like a limiting factor or an antagonistic element in higher concentrations. So do some soil testing and figure that out. All right. So something I wanted to do this time is to preempt some questions and answer questions that I get all the time in my email inbox. So this may resonate with you, or it may not, but the next question might. So and it won't take forever going through each of them. So stick around if you don't have sand or if you don't have clay, stick around. We're getting to a bunch of other things too. So what if I have sand? Well, if you're extremely close to the ocean, it will salt your soil, and that's what one of our on YouTube, Gavin was talking about. And if that's your situation, you need to set up a salt resistant filtration edge of high surface area, like a berm to lift things up. And so it sends the air up and over it. And the surface area, the more edge there is, the more leaves there are, the more small leaves, the more surface area. I mean, the ultimate is like the fir trees, the pines, the needles, all those kinds of surface areas, the conifers. But it has to be salt resistant and it has to be native to your area because it's got to tough it out and take the hit for your plants further on into your system. And how close you are determines how thick this interference layer has to be. And you're gonna have to trial and error that because it really depends on where you live, right? So layers of native salt resistant plants to filter the air and fog. I recommend basically setting up a native food forest berm, not food forest, a native plant forest on a berm that starts small and ramps up to larger sized with a canopy, like a tall full-size tree at the end of this ramp. So it sends things up and filters things as they go. And the things that pass through with the air that passes through, it will filter and drop things before it reaches your plants. So the main issue with sand, it's that lack of structure. It's those basketballs, right? All that space. So let's go back to fundamentals again. It's first principles. That's what I love to do with all this stuff. What makes the soil structure? Well, it's these bacterial glues that are tied together by the fungal hyphae. And then it's these macro and micro arthropods. These arthropod just means leg joints. Okay. So like ants and mites and stuff that have leg joints. Easy peasy. And so they're just like working through the soil and moving things around and tunneling. And then nematodes and worms, they're tunneling. Moles and other animals, they're tunneling and shifting things around. They're manuring. All of these things are manuring except for the fungi and bacteria. The fungi can die off and then be decomposed. The bacteria, they divide or they lyse or they're consumed by other things. And that's the whole cycle that we've talked about as well. But it's when you break it down, it's just life. It's life that creates the actual structure. It's the behavior of life. So it's not just you add life and boom, structure. There has to be some interaction, some time. So we need the right biology and habitat plus photosynthesis and plant roots to actually tie this all together and make this whole scene happen. So get the best compost possible, get the best inoculants possible, and spike your compost because your compost can contain all the inoculants, all the rhizobia. You know how you inoculate your peas and beans and such. It can stay in the compost for at least a year. Otherwise, it wouldn't persist in the soil for over the winter and be there readily in the soil for the next time you plant. That's why they say you only have to inoculate with nitrogen fixing rhizobia once. So that goes with everything. That's a great general rule of thumb. So get the best inoculants possible, spike your compost because the compost does not have everything that plants need. It's just really important to understand that. And get kelp and rock dust, just like with all the, the compost tea recipes where they, Elaine Ingham's adding the kelp, she's adding the fish emulsion, which have all the nutrients in them. So it's and then the biology are feeding on that. And then the nutrients from all that food are inside the biology, and you feed them, and then rhizophagy eats them, and the other microbes eat them and releases that nutrition. So it's a delivery mechanism. Charge your biochar with the above, because biochar is going to hold in the soil and provide habitat. Remember, I said habitat with the last slide. We got to provide habitat for the life. So the compost is going to have life, no doubt, but it's generalized and it has like 50 to 60% of what you need. And then you're going to bring in all the minerals with the kelp and the rock dust that are missing from the soils that easily get washed out, but you're going to be adding them into your compost as you're either mixing the compost or making the compost, and then you're going to be adding the biochar. Let's say you bought the compost and you didn't make it. So you didn't make it with the kelp, rock dust, and biochar in it. You'd add the inoculants at the end because you don't want to potentially burn up the inoculants. Though I can say Burkholderia, Rhizobia, Rhodopseudomonas palustris, none of those things burn up in the compost pile. So so keep that in mind as well. But you want to combine all these things, even if you're buying it. What you would do is make a giant compost pile of the good compost that you bought, add all the kelp and rock dust in and the biochar, and get it moist and wet, and tarp it and let it sit for a few days and kind of do an extra fermentation process, because the kelp, rock dust, and biochar will stimulate it. And if it's like completely finished compost, it won't stimulate it a huge amount, but it still will stimulate it. And that interaction is crossover, is them entering the biochar, is making it so that the biochar will have the amenable habitat for the microbes to stay longer. Okay. So you're going to be adding that, mix it in with your topsoil. You're going to plant a nitrogen fixing cover crop, and ideally a nitrogen fixing food forest edge to protect your gardens. Native plants, palms, nitrogen fixers. You're essentially going to create an island. And this is a metaphor that's going to continue today. And we're going to, you probably heard it as well as like the nucleus in permaculture. We're going to start with our home site or make our nucleus and go out from the, right? Same idea. It's universal. There's that tender, protected spot in the middle of the forest. It's the most fertile. So what we're doing, we're creating areas of fertility. I'm just gonna mute everyone. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate you all. All right. So why nitrogen fixers, you might be asking? Well, they're tenacious. It's another reason why we have to be careful with them. They're tenacious. And so they can persist in very trying circumstances. This is the acacia and legumes are in every continent. They're they're just widespread. Every climate, every continent, they are powering through because of this relationship with nitrogen from the air. They've been growing out of rock. Like we talked about last week, they can be growing out of a cliff, but it's because of this relationship that allows them to stick. So they're tenacious. But the biology is in the nodule. That's also why they're protected. They're enfortressed inside that little nodule. See the red there? That's them. I cut that open to show us them. And the excess nitrogen is released to the rhizosphere through Burkholderia and Bradyrhizobia. I wrote Burkholderia, but it should be Burkholderia, like holder. Nitrogen makes our compost hot. Yep, it certainly does. And it's also the key to microbial action that creates heat and powers plants and their reactions in the soil. So that nitrogen that they're fixing in there, all endophytes fix nitrogen, and it feeds the plant. So look at this with me for a second. So when we talk about sand, pure sand, like let's go extreme here, because What I said about the island effect, you can notice here in a naturally occurring system. So you can see on the right-hand side, this is where the water's collecting and it's spilling out into the left side. But can you notice the edges? Look at that. The tender grasses are green and on the right. The more woody brown grasses that are tougher are on the left. And then there's that like lone tree and that lone line of trees. And then, hey, look at the trees and palms lining the water. One of them's smack dab in the middle of the water. It knows what it's about. And then on this side, oh man, do you see it? It's lying just all the way around. This is the pattern. And so we're just following nature's pattern here. This is nothing incredibly hard to do. That's why I teach this. That's why I have students all over the world. That's why people who are in high school, people that are in college, people that are adults, people that are retired, scientists, citizen scientists, and gardeners and farmers all alike are finding this easy to implement and understand after they start getting over the fact that it's such a big picture. I think that's the number one thing, is that people are like, do I really have to understand all of these things? And once you do, it makes it easy. That's the thing. That's the thing, is once you understand all this stuff and you go through the steps, it becomes this symphony that you get to play a part in. And that's what's so cool. And I want you to be able to participate. So what if I have heavy clay? Well, if it's pure clay, make a pond. I mean, nature's trying to tell you something. Not everyone has that pure, like you could sell it kind of clay. So if you have that, listen to your site and what nature's actually trying to provide. Natural building, adobe, all those kinds of things can happen. But the keys here, pragmatically speaking, are aeration, organic matter, plant-roots biology, all to create structure. It goes back to that structure thing again. We're pancake, we're pure minerals here. And it's broad forking if you're on the small scale to break that up, or ripping, chisel plowing, key line if you're on the bigger scale, if you're on a farm or a ranch, something like that. And you might really need to get tough with it because it might be calicky, it might be all sorts of things. But to get in there is key. To break it up is key. Understanding what the imbalances are is also really key. So get a soil test. If your calcium, magnesium levels are off, you can create concrete. That's what happened to certain famous people. So it's key to get this right. Get the best compost possible. And get the best inoculants possible to add to everything. And that's mycorrhizae, that's rhizobia, that's so many others. I mean, that's hundreds. There's literally hundreds of emerging biofertilizers, depending on where you are and what you're doing, that can help you and dramatically change the results that you're getting. Because compost literally does not have everything that plants need. Compost does not have all the microbes that plants need. There are published examples of certified soil labs that are finding plants with less biology doing better than plants with more biology. And it's the certified complete compost. It's everything. And this is a published journal, and they're commercial farming saying on a commercial scale, this doesn't work. The metrics don't work that have been generally put out. And it's because they're not actually getting the biofertilizing microbes on there, and they're not being able to differentiate the bacteria. They're not being able to truly identify who's who bacteria wise and fungi wise, because it's a lot of new information that's come out in the past couple of years. So it's really important and incredibly important.
Okay, this is a problem. I've never.
I'm going to mute you. Thanks. So inoculants, it's incredibly important to understand that they have a place. And if you're like, Matt, I'm all indigenous microbes, man, those commercial inoculants, that's like witchcraft or something like that. I remind you that the witches were actually the herbalists in Europe. We all love our local herbalist. But actually, truly, what happens is the indigenous microbes are stronger. And when you bring in foreign microbes, they stimulate and you've probably heard someone say this, and you're like, how do you really know that's true, Matt? It's called horizontal gene transfer. And I know this is true because I've tested 2 different generations uh, of 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 a biofertilizer brew that started off, and then we know what it is, and that's like the thing. And then it was brewed with wild water, and the cousins of that. I'm like beating around it. Okay, I tested 2 different versions of EM. Got me doing a reveal again. Look at you guys. All right. So I tested 2 different versions of EM. One which was a 20-year extension of a mother culture EM. I need to call him and tell him all this. Maybe he's watching. And the lactobacillus is not there. So lactobacillus that was in the original EM was replaced by all these cousins that were wild. And so none of them are lactobacillus. There's like lactocasein bacillus. There's like bacillus. There's like all these variations and cousins of that are from the natural environment that he interacted with. So not only did the indigenous microbes take over, they creeped into his EM and took over. That's why the EM Terraganics folks are like, you can't extend the EM forever. You know what I mean? Because things will happen. It won't be the original. Because of horizontal gene transfer, there is no, yeah, it's not the original. But it's indigenous now. And there's so much more to this. I can't get into the DNA thing because it's an entire book of information that's rattling in my head, and I'm writing it down slowly and discussing it with other people who are doing DNA sequencing right now. The DNA sequencing stuff is like going to the back of the book and looking at the answers, being able to actually look at the compost and be like, oh my word, these all come through hot compost. These things don't. It's really, really incredibly enlightening. And that's why I'm going to have an entire book on the compost tea, IMO, all the DNA testing and results and what it means and why it's important that we understand that so that we can use them properly. So that's coming. And that's a little bit of a reveal there. And then, getting your kelp and rock dust in there, charging your biochar with all of the above, broad forking it in. So because you remember your clay, like it tends to stay together. And so when you broad fork, it tends to create this like crack that opens up. You clay folk, you know what I'm talking about. And you like can throw things down there at that moment. And so you could have an assistant who's like with the wheelbarrow and shovel and just shovels in 2 shovelfuls of compost that's with the biochar in it and all the good stuff in it right there and then you throw seeds on top of it, or you go and then seed, whatever, or you pop your tree in there, whatever you're gonna do, or you have a ripper and you're like, I'm doing this all at once, Matt. Forget this craziness. I'm making a slurry of all those ingredients and we're injecting it in the ground as I rip. I'm doing one pass, set it and forget it. Let's go. I'd say that's pretty rocking. And then you can be planting daikon radish and other deep-rooted plants for cover crop. And you can chop and drop or terminate it with the season change or rainy season arrival to have that microbial action get popped up again. And when you do that, you can be adding compost tea, IMO3, all these different things to help that break down, help that break down. So always keep moisture levels in the soil and the plants photosynthesizing. That is so critically important, because without moisture in the soil, you don't photosynthesize. So that energy is going into the soil and essentially shocking the soil. The plants can't do what they're doing. And so they're internally like grinding their gears. The moisture levels, it's connectivity for the microbes, it's photosynthesis for the plants, it's the ability for your clay to not turn into a brick. It's all of these things. And so you have to be really on it. You have to protect that soil with mulch. It could be perennials or even a food forest as well. So in general, we're talking about no bare soil, no dry soil, and no rest, because the more you're photosynthesizing, the more energy, the more organic matter that you're bringing in, the more microbial action. That's the secret of Singing Frogs Farm, is that they give it no rest. They're always sending down those photosynthetic vibes. So it's organic matter. It buffers out the mineral antagonism and the pH extremes. Again, there's a theme here, isn't there? And we see that with photosynthesis. That's what's creating the organic matter. It's the carbohydrates and the sugars from the given to the fungi, bacteria, processing through all the different stages and the soil food web trophic levels to make that happen. So keep that photosynthesis happening. What if I have waterlogged anaerobic soil? This is a great question. If you're too close to the water, you might be just too close to the water. You might be in habitat essentially. And if you're there, you might be doing some chinampas instead. So just like those islands that we were just talking about, maybe you're literally making islands. Okay. And this is the drawing from Permaculture Student 2. But what about, like, let's make it real, Matt. Hey, notice another pattern that I already mentioned. Anyone? Bueller? It's the ring around the rosy, pocket full of posy. It's water-loving perennials on the edge instead of the salt-resistant perennials on your edge, with the water-loving perennials on the edge and trees, tying up the edge. And then you're taking the soil from below in where the water is and putting it on top. So this whole going down to go up to get out of the water table is ubiquitous in plants and systems all over the world, because you got to have those plants not have wet feet. They got to be above the water table. So you go down to get up, go down to go up. And you're like, Matt, what if mine's not that drastic? I mean, come on. I'm not going to be making islands. The same idea, though, just hill up to keep the roots above the water table. So, and if you're, in Missouri, you might not be doing swales on contour. You might be doing a keyline system and sending things canted off contour to send that water peeling away so that you don't overwhelm your plants into a water growth situation. Now, what if I can only buy soil and compost? Okay. Bad compost is not better than no compost. Okay. Just know that. If you come away with anything, understand that the plants themselves are going to do the work, and you don't necessarily need compost just because it says compost. You need good compost if you can get it. And if you can't get it, order it online from my friends, Catalyst Bioamendments, a small amount, turn it into a compost tea and water it in. And that will give your plants the nourishment and start the process of the flywheel of biology in the soil around their roots. And also, if you got a microscope, check it, look at it, compare it to what you're doing. It's a great way to see where we're at. And it's a great way to learn how to make good compost. And I would say the number one thing to do is to learn how to make good compost. I've got tons of directions on my YouTube. It's in my books. The Permaculture Student 2 is free online. I read it as an audiobook on my YouTube. This information, is out there. The Elaning methods out there. Just know that the methods that are out there usually don't mention the fact that now she's teaching people to age it 20 to 40 to 60 days after it cools. So it doesn't get turned after that. So it's no longer an aerobic process. So catalyst bioamendments, get it as a frame of reference. You can get a small amount. Smell is only a partial guide. So you need to learn to know your compost. But if you must buy from someone proven to be safe and beneficial. And a good way to do that is to find out where the local organic farmers market farms are getting their compost. Go and visit, go taste people's food, find people with really good food, and ask them about where they get their compost. And then get the minerals, biological inoculants, the plants in the soil photosynthesizing. All right, do you notice any reoccurring themes? It all relates back to these simple ideas and elements that overlap and interact. It's simple, but it takes this discernment from knowledge and experience. Now, you may be asking yourself, is this possible for me? Well, let's look at some examples, okay? Let's look at some more extremes, because I think that when we see the extreme of what's possible, it can really give us kind of like a reality check and also reassurance that, hey, we got this. We got this. The Albedo Project is a great example. In 2013, it was this. 3 years later, it was this. Neil Speckman did a great job here. Initially, Jeff Lawton helped him with the designs. Then Neil refined it with the knowledge from the Regenerative online program, Rex, and the Regenerative in-person event with Darren Doherty. And it was earthworks, perennials, nitrogen fixtures, and rainwater. They didn't bring in things. It wasn't like they brought in compost. It wasn't like they brought in water. It wasn't, there's no fertilizer. So no grazing. So it wasn't like an Allen Savory thing, or this was strictly earthworks, perennials, nitrogen fixtures, and rainwater. There's the earthworks. There's stones that were hand moved. And look, is your site looking like this? If your site is looking like this, know that it can turn into a paradise. I get emotional about this because this was the land of milk and honey, right? Like all the Middle East and stuff was land where Fertile Crescent was, where the biblical stories played out. These were paradisical areas, and it can be again. If you watch the video of the Albedo Project, I get emotionally like stirred by it every single time because it's so stunningly beautiful to go from this starkness to that kind of beauty. It's why we're here. It's who we are. And so that's why I do this work. Todd Harrington's Governor's Island story. Todd Harrington did an incredible job. I heard about this story. This is, before, look to the left side, okay? Not the right side so much. See that transformation back and forth? It's beautiful. And what it was compost, mycorrhizae, and native plants. And now it's a glamping site inside New York City. And it features this restored native forest. It's beautiful, right? Don't you guys think that's beautiful? I think it's beautiful. I think it's a statement about where we're headed. And one of the really crazy parts about this was the way I learned about this was one of my soil mentors, Elaine Ingham, was an advisor to Todd on this. And then the glamping company was the best man for my weddings company. So small world, right? All right. So speaking of small world, let's talk about my story. And maybe I'll take a moment here to talk about where we are at right now. We are in Texas. This site that we're about to talk about is in Corsco, California. It's very similar to where I am now. which makes me want to start my seed farm here in Texas. The housing market's insane. Real estate market's insane. I'm gonna wait till the bubble pops. We're gonna wait it out. Or if someone has land that they wanna help us out with, get access to, message me, call me, because we're very interested. We want to set up our seed farm as soon as possible, because we are in an area that is just like Corsical where I started out. So we've been going to different sites over the years, and we've worked on many different sites, but this area in Corsical is where I grew out all my seed projects, where I grew the most seeds, where I did the most work. And this climate type is the same as in Texas, is really hot and dry, and it's kind of like where my heart is. um I miss skiing a lot. I miss skiing a lot. The cold winter in the mountains and stuff is like deep in my heart. But we'll get back there someday and visit. But the heat, man, that's where I love working with the plants, um, in this climate. There's I would just think about all these individual plants, like the purple speckled Peruvian Piscarantu landrace adaptation corn that I worked with for so many years. How I got the speckles to jump onto painted mountain corn, and then I got the purple to jump onto painted mountain corn. I have this incredible flower. I'm going on a tangent. But anyway, my point is that I'm right now in Texas in the suburbs, and we're on a third of an acre, and not many people know that because I haven't shown that because I've been working so hard on the lab stuff. And some people comment on YouTube, you're like, you're just always in a lab. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've got to like be able to do this well. The DNA stuff, all this stuff has been so informative. It's changed everything for me. So that's why. Um, but I've got alfalfa, I've got hay, I've got a bunch of kitchen compost, got my biochar, my kelp, my rock dust. So I'm about to do exactly the kind of things that we've been talking about here today on this site, and I'm going to film it. It's a third of an acre. It's a really cute site. Almost everything we have is in storage because we're in a teeny little house. But we love it. It's a lot of fun. It feels like we're kind of like on vacation. You know what I mean? We're in a new place. Um, but we're gonna make this site unbelievable. Got a huge order from a Peaceful Valley of organic plants coming in the mail, where we're going to be cooking up some nice compost. We're going to be doing all of the biological inoculants. And I'm actually probably going to do a bunch of experiments and compare and contrast, and then take soil samples and DNA sequence and see what persists and what doesn't, to continue to prove out that horizontal gene transfer is actually having the indigenous microbes take over the introduced inoculants. I'm going to continue to prove that out, because just because it's working with the microbes that we've seen so far doesn't mean that it works for everything all the time, everywhere, forever. You know what I mean? Right. So we want to explore these things. And so I'm going to be doing even more testing. As I prepare to start a seed company in our seed farm and homestead, somewhere here in Texas or elsewhere, depending on what the stars align for us. But this is where I began. This is the Coarse Gold site. This is just below Yosemite. Let me move my little screen out of the way so you guys can see better. Yeah. It's the California foothills. And it was burning out and dying from the bark beetle when I was there. And you can see this. It's bald. And then look on the left side there. See the erosion? So without the tree roots living right there, and you can even see the scrub oak's dead. See how the scrub oak is dead there on the left? Yeah. So this is where we were living, and it was really obvious that everything's going downhill in California and no one's dealing with the actual problem. And it starts up top. It starts with the soil. It starts with the watersheds. It's all managed for destruction. It's all managed to create forest fires. It's horrific once you have a basic understanding of permaculture and key line design. When you start traveling through these places and realize they are designed for maximum devastation. And so I really worry about all of our friends and family in California in these areas because of how these spaces are being actively managed with no regard for human life or safety. So that erosion right there, that's decomposed granite. So it's like chunky sand, like giant chunky sand. It's like sugar sand. And it hardens up and locks up into bulletproof soil. And this is what I started out with. People thought I was crazy for even gardening. You guys know that? When I started gardening, people said I was foolish for gardening. Maybe people are telling you right now that it's a fool's errand that you're doing. Can't grow a food forest here. You can't grow food here. Well, I already climbed that mountain. You can too. So did Neil Speckman in Al-Baida in Saudi Arabia. You can do this. And my soils there were oxidized and alkaline, as are most California soils. In the sunlight, my soils hit 140 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 inches deep. That's the Sierra Nevadas, and this is their water situation. Once upon a time, where the city of Tulare was the largest freshwater body of water west of the Mississippi, and they drained it. So these areas, see all those rivers leading down? They dammed all those up at the point at which they form. And they have for years been just moving the water away from these areas. So all the distance between the farms and the catchment where the water was traveling and soaking in, replenishing the landscape, was removed. And so all of it, of course, dried out. You can see their extensive damming system. Pretty damn stupid. What I did, well, I started slowing down the flow of water. I used swales, and I did furrows inside the swale so that the water would even be slowed down there as well. Then I planted nitrogen fixers and brassicas, covered it with straw and organic matter. Then we planted nitrogen fixers and hardy trees. My boys when they were young. And then it grew, and it was absolutely incredible. And you can see at the edge the color change from the exudates from the plants are actually physically changing the color of the soil. And the reason the plants got so tall is because it was so oxidized and alkaline. And because those plants are weeds technically. So I added compost tea and compost. I planted nitrogen fixers and a huge diversity of plants. I would actually mix dozens of different seeds together in giant jars and throw them. I was the throw sow king, and people thought I was crazy and was wasting seeds, except it would turn out like that. So I don't know what they're talking about. I created massive amounts of soil, and what I discovered in the California sun, which is not like your sun in most places, it's so hot that you could be growing winter crops under 3 layers of canopy in the middle of summer. So it's shaded and cooler down there, but they're still getting the same amount of joules of energy and sunlight as they would in winter. Super fascinating. So that's something that I've done. And I just got really into it. I loved it. And we're going to be doing it again sometime. So that's that speckled corn that I was telling you about. This is one of the things I want to feature as my seed company. I adapted this. I didn't realize this was a thing, like a big deal. And then I was live with Stephen Smith at Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, and he was like, "Yeah, you're the only one that's done this." And I was like, "Excuse me?" They're like, "Yeah, university scientists have said it's impossible." And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, Okay, we're calling this impossible purple speckled. And that's what it is. But do you notice any recurring themes between all this, guys? Rubble, sand, hydrophobic, and penetrable into soil that dramatically improves season after season, regenerates itself. That's what I'm offering. That's what I teach. That's what regenerative soil really is all about. And if you want to learn more, stay tuned because we're going to have part 3 in this series. And stay tuned right now for the live Q&A. Add your question to the chat. And thank you all for being here. I hope today was fun for you, and that you enjoyed it. I'm Matt Powers. Grow abundantly, learn daily, and live regeneratively. Thank you for being here. Soil is the linchpin to life, to civilization, to health. If we want a healthy future, to fight environmental collapse, to live regeneratively and ethically, and to experience a life of abundance and freedom, we want healthy and abundant soil everywhere. But that means we need to relearn old ways and learn some new ways to build, cycle, and partner with soil and soil life. We can change the world radically, but it's up to us. We have to make those choices. We have to partner with soil and soil life. It takes our participation and support. Will you join us? Regenerative Soil, the full program, we're going to dive deep. We're going to be looking commercial. We're going to be looking DIY. We're going to be going garden. We're going to be going farm scale. We're going to cover it all. We want to serve everyone at all levels, and we want to create that fluency, micro to macro, so that we can spread the regeneration of our soil, our ecosystems, all our systems, all across the world. You can do this. You can regenerate soil because regenerative soil is the linchpin for life. It's the linchpin for all systems, all of our civilization. Everything is running on this. Everything is based on this. Everything is relying upon this. Check out the link down below. Sign up and join us in Regenerative Soil, the full online course. You're not going to want to miss it. I'm Matt Powers. Grow abundantly, learn daily, and live regeneratively.